Is it better to rent or buy? I mean, if you're looking for a new home and you're thinking about, a house or a condo or apartment, right? There's choices out there. Do you want to rent or buy? Well, in this video, we'll explore all the options and talk about the pros and cons of each. And that is on the New York Times. And so they had come up with a similar question, right? Is it better to rent or to buy? And they came up with this pretty interesting kind of financial calculator that runs through a bunch of the key considerations. The basics are home price. So if you buy, depending on the price of the home, is it better to become a buyer or better to rent? As you can see here, right in the first graph, much lower the price, buying is better. The much higher the price, maybe renting is better. And it just kind of depends. In the market, I'm in Madison area, Madison, Wisconsin, Dane County market, and around here, our median home price as of April of 2024 just hit an all-time high at $450,000. Last year at this time it was around $410,000, so we've definitely seen home values still going up in the last few years. Right now we're at $450,000. So I'm just going to put this at $450,000. And this one, it says, well, maybe renting saves you $52,000 over the next 10 years based on a bunch of these assumptions that the calculator is making. So as you see, I'm going to take some time and just work through this calculator because there's actually a whole bunch of calculations that go into whether it's renting is better or versus buying is better. My default answer, however, though, is usually if you're going to be in a home for at least a couple years, 2, 3, 4 or more years, it's usually better to become a homeowner. But I don't want to, spoiler alert, I'll just say that's the default answer and you should definitely do it. I'd like to still go through some of the pros and cons in this video. But regardless, let's go through some of these assumptions. If you rent, what's kind of your target rent for what you think it might be? If it's going to be maybe just a smaller apartment, 1 or 2 bedrooms, maybe you can get in for $1,000 or $1,200 a month. But if you're looking at 3 or 4 bedrooms, maybe a larger home or a duplex or something like that, maybe you're talking closer to $2,300, $2,400. It depends on how much you might rent. So for our median priced home is at $450,000. So we're probably talking about maybe a 3 or 4 bedroom single family home. And I've seen them rent right around maybe $3,000 a month, plus or minus a few $100s. But that's maybe some of the going rate for our rental cost here. Just as you can see now, suddenly our calculator swings and it says, oh, buying saves you $113,000 over the next 10 years. But again, we're going to continue to make these calculations. But the next question is, how long do you plan to stay in the home? So kind of like I had said before, if we're going to be there more than 5 years, buying definitely seems to make sense, at least according to this calculator so far. So how much are your initial costs of buying versus renting, because you're going to have typically down payment, closing costs, and then of course your recurring costs every single month. Your rent, as you know, just goes straight to the landlord, whereas if you own and buy a home, then part of your monthly payment goes back to you in the form of equity because you're paying down a mortgage and principal on a home that you own. But of course there's an opportunity cost, right? Sometimes maybe you just moved to an area and you're not sure if you're going to stay there for very long. If you're only going to be there a year, it may not make sense to buy, right? Becoming a renter is probably a better idea until you've determined that you're maybe going to stay there a little bit longer, and in which case, then maybe it makes more sense to look at possibly buying. So what about our monthly stats at the $450,000, like I said, and how long do you plan to stay? National average is typically people are staying in their homes. It used to be close to 7 or 8 years. However, that number has definitely been trending up. A lot of the people that buy are now in their homes 10 or more years. And I've definitely had clients recently where they've been in their homes over 20 years. I personally was just in a home for the last 12 years and we just sold that, bought a different home. Sometimes it depends, right? Sometimes if you're in maybe a more starter home, maybe you're only going to be there for 3 or 4 years until you eventually maybe decide to upgrade to a little bit larger home or build your forever dream home. Then it kind of depends. But I would say if you would calculate somewhere in that 7 to 10 year range, I think is close to what more our national average will tend to be. We'll say maybe 9 years. How about that? How long you plan to stay? Now, what are your mortgage details? So mortgage rates have been the topic of conversation among realtors and in the real estate market. During COVID, we were seeing record low interest rates, as low as 2.5% or 3%, something like that. Rates have definitely been trending up. So looking at one of the places I go to look at mortgage rates is the Mortgage News Daily, right? They come up with mortgage rates every single day and give, right now, their 30-year fixed, they're saying is 7.09%. Now, you could talk with a mortgage lender and you might get a rate that's lower than that, maybe 6.5 or 6.75, or you might get a rate that's just higher than that. In my experience, your mortgage rate is going to be influenced by a number of factors. One is your credit score, one is your debt to income ratios, one is how much you plan to put for a down payment, and all of that will have somewhat micro adjustments in terms of the rate. But what I kind of like about the Mortgage News Daily is it's kind of an average of what that rate is going to be. Some websites and some banks I've seen, they'll publish rates that are consistently maybe 0.5% lower than that. Well, if you read the fine print, you got to put down 40% and you got to have over an 800 credit score. That's definitely not everybody. In fact, as we're going to explore, you can buy a home as low as 3.5% down for like an FHA loan, or a 5% down for a conventional loan, or 10% down. But once you do get to 20% down, then you do have some other advantages. One, you don't have to pay private mortgage insurance, which banks consider less than 20% down a slightly higher risk, so they charge private mortgage insurance for that. If you're a veteran, there's VA loans. Those you can get with actually no money down, or there's also a rural development loan that also is a no money down loan. And in local markets, there's also certain grants and other things available as well, and that's definitely something to consider. But regardless, let's go back to our New York Times calculator. If we assume rates are at not 8%, but say they're closer to 7%, that's assuming you'd get maybe a 30-year fixed mortgage at this point. There has been talks, I know, of rates possibly coming down at some point this year, and right now this video is being shot May of 2024, so we'll see if that holds true, and later in the year and in next year what rates end up doing. But one thing that is also kind of interesting about, if you do buy a home, you're locking in to that mortgage rate, and you can stay there as long as you want, but if rates come down, you can always also refinance and then also lower your payment at a later date. If you were fortunate enough to lock in at a much lower rate, like during COVID, for example, you're locking in that cost for the long term, for potentially up to 30 years or something like that. Next step is going to be down payment. How much do you want to put down on the home? So, like I said, FHA, they're going to do as low as 3.5% down. Conventional loans are usually 5% down, or you could do as much as 10%. If you do put 20% down, like I said, you do eliminate that private mortgage insurance. However, that's 20% of $450,000, you're talking $90,000, okay? So if you're a first-time buyer and you see that and you're like, oh my gosh, I gotta save up $90,000, I don't know if I can do that, or how long is that gonna take me? Maybe that's not the best option for a first-time buyer. I mean, I remember buying my first home and we definitely didn't put down 20%, but we put down a little bit less. You know, maybe you can do 5% or 10% down. If you did save up to, like I said, that 5%, now you're at $22,500. Certainly it's, you know, a big chunk of change. It's nothing, you know, it's not a small amount of money, but you can at least get into the home, and then as you're there, the home value is hopefully appreciating in value, going up in value, and you're also paying down that principal. That as the principal amount goes down and the value goes up, your equity, that percentage that you own in the home, in other words, down payment, right, is going up over time. Hey, I hope you find this video helpful. Just wanted to let you know, if you are leaning more toward buying a new home or condo in the Madison area, we would definitely be able to help. That's definitely something that our team has helped lots of people with. Highly recommend we either set up a time to meet either in our office, or we can do like a Google Meet virtual meeting. Just give us a call and we can figure out what's going to be the best situation for you. 608-440-9886. Thank you. So if the value goes way up, now say you buy it at 5% down, but the value goes way up next year or something. Maybe next year, you've got 10% equity. It's like you had just put down 10%, but you didn't have to. You only put down 5% because the value rose over time. So anyway, we can adjust it later, but maybe we'll just put down 5% for now and kind of go from there. So 30 years is kind of the max I'm typically seeing for loan amortization periods. They'll take your payments, $437,000, right? If you put 5% down, that $437,000 spread out over the next 30 years, and that's what your monthly payment is going to be based on. Again, private mortgage insurance is based on if you have less than 20% down. So 20% down on that 450, now you're talking $90,000. Now you don't have to pay private mortgage insurance. That amount goes to zero. But again, if you're a first-time buyer, maybe you need that. Maybe you put 5% down, you're talking $300 a month. It's, again, not a small amount of money, but you can at least get into the home, and then that payment does go away once you get to the 20% equity. So sometimes maybe you don't quite have 20%, but maybe you get 10% down, then maybe that'll cut your PMI payment down a little bit more, and then you can get closer to that equity faster. That's the other benefit of that. So that might be a good option as well. But maybe you've been in your home for a number of years. Maybe you're one of the persons that has been in their home 5 to 10 years, and maybe you're looking to upgrade. Well, you're probably not looking at a median priced home. Right now, you're probably looking at maybe that next step up. Maybe it's 6, 7, 8, maybe even double. Maybe it's 900,000. What could be, you can take that equity that you've earned over time and move that to the next house. Today, your median priced home is $450,000. Well, maybe 10 years ago, it was $250,000. So maybe you got $200,000 in equity, 20% down on $1 million property. Well, if you could put down even 20% down. So that's where most of the times I'm seeing people that are maybe moving up to the next home, their second or third home or something like that. That's typically when I'm seeing people put 20% or more as their down payment, right? Because they're not holding all that money just in cash, but they're holding it in equity in their home. So they sell their current home. So again, it's a median priced home, and they sell it and cash out their equity. Or maybe they use $180,000 of that equity and use that into the next home. If they did that, then they'd have no private mortgage insurance. They could still amortize it out, but then your monthly payment, principal and interest, is at the $47.90, and that's based on $900,000 purchase price. But if maybe you don't want to spend $900,000, right? Maybe you only want to spend you want a little bit larger home. Maybe you want to spend closer to like $650 or something like that, right? It's still maybe more of an upgrade from where you're currently at if you were at a more median priced home, but maybe that payment isn't quite as terrible, $34.60. Maybe that's a little bit more palatable on a monthly basis than going all the way to what you max maybe could afford for kind of that move up kind of buyer. Some other options to consider. Some of these inputs matter a lot and others less. They've tried to make some reasonable guesses on where to start. What does the future hold? Here, you can put in home price growth rate. This is our home appreciation rate. And last year, according to our monthly stats, the entire south central Wisconsin area, home prices were up 22.9%. Dane County, our sales, those are sales. Our prices, but they've gone up, like I said, up from like 410 up to 450, seeing almost a 10% rise in median home prices. And which you can see Dane County, April 2023 from 418 to 450, that's a 7.4% increase. Which is still higher than I think is a reasonable target. Historically, we like to see maybe 3 to 5% for an appreciation rate. During COVID, we were seeing rates in the Madison area closer to 15, maybe 20% even. Now it's slowed down, but still is rising at 7.4%. So I'd say I'd like to be conservative on this as far as home price growth rate. Like I said, I know the Fed usually likes to see it somewhere closer to that 3%. I think is a good healthy number. If it gets way overinflated for too long, then there can be some risk that the values can swing, which if you read in some of the headlines, I'm even seeing that in some areas of like Texas or Florida or California, where some of those values that definitely spiked way up during COVID, they spiked a lot higher than they did in the Midwest. And those values are definitely coming down a little bit more. In the Midwest, we're a little bit more conservative. But anyway, regardless, I would recommend putting in some type of reasonable target, maybe 4 or 5%, something like that. We'll say 4.5%, at least for now, because we are still seeing values rise. Mainly, partly also due to the fact of there's a little bit of a housing shortage. So not enough homes out there for people that do want to buy, and also seeing really low inventory levels, which we're also seeing here. Inventory levels are coming up, right? Good news for available inventory, 6 months in a row. In April, the number of homes for sale has gone up, which is good, but we're still in a pretty strong seller's market. Right now, 1.1 months for Dane County, which is still a pretty strong seller's market, which is also contributing to the fact that our values are still rising. Rent growth rate. So rents is another factor, right? They may grow at a similar rate. I tend to follow more of the resale markets. I don't follow the rental market quite as closely, but maybe the rents don't rise quite as quickly, but I've certainly heard stories of some people, their rent's gone up 5-10% or more in a year. But if we say we just keep it even close to the same, 4.5% for home price growth, and maybe your rent growth rate is around the same. And then investment return on investment. So this would be sort of your alternative for, I think, the opportunity cost, right? So if you have 50,000 or 100,000 or however much you're going to put as cash into your home as an investment, what would be your rate of return on that cash if I were to say put it in a stock market or some other asset that's an investment return rate? Maybe you can get something between 4 and 10%. If you can get 10 or 15%, I think is a lot harder to get. Is it possible? Absolutely, but it's definitely a lot harder. But maybe more modest investment return if you were to invest something in with an investment financial advisor or something like that. Maybe you can get a return of closer to that 7% mark, where you can do a conservative like CD or something like that, and you get, what do you get, like 1% or something like that, 2% maybe on a CD. So it's kind of up to you what your appetite for risk is as far as investment. That's not exactly within the scope of this video, but it is, I think, worthwhile to just consider the opportunity cost for the cash and where you would put that money. Maybe we'll put it somewhere close to the middle, like 7%. And then inflation rate, this has been all over the news as well. It's a huge reason why mortgage rates are as high as they are, because inflation has been much higher than the target of close to 2%. That's kind of where the Fed is hoping to target inflation, and we've been at 3.5%, I think was the last report, but anywhere from 3 to 4%. It's definitely impacting why mortgage rates are staying a little bit higher. Right now, maybe we'll put kind of for a target inflation rate, if we can get closer to like 3%, that'd be down a little bit from, I think the last report was at 3.4, 3.2, something like that. So that's kind of where we're at today.
Hey, Josh here. Just want to let you know that our real estate team, we've helped hundreds of people over the years that are relocating to the Madison area and relocating to other areas as well. But if you are relocating to the area and you want to get hooked up and just get connected and learn a little bit more about the area, what are the good neighborhoods and whatnot that's going to be best for you, feel free to reach out to our team, and we'll get connected and have a conversation about the options and maybe what your timeline might be. 608-440-9886 is our number. Thank you.
What else? Property taxes and mortgage interest costs. Those are also significant, but also are deductible. Property taxes. There is, with current tax laws, there's some incentives for buying a home, so you can deduct some of the property taxes and then also some of the based off your current tax rate, mortgage tax rate. So taxes, let's see, I was looking at Dane County and our property tax rate, we base it off of the mill rate and then the assessed value. And in Madison, for example, is $18.28 per thousand. So roughly 1.8% of the assessed value. And the assessed value is typically less than the market value. I am usually seeing homes sell for more than the assessed value in our current market. And as home values go up over time, that's definitely going to hold true. If a property needs a lot of repairs, then obviously I'm seeing it sell for less than the assessed value, but that's one way to consider the taxes. Let's look at some actual examples of what those property taxes are going to be. I was just doing a search of homes like in that 425 to 460 price range, and getting some close to 450, for example, because that's our median price. So this one sold recently. It's over on the west side of Madison on Mammoth Trail, and this is kind of close to Verona, kind of near like Epic and that kind of thing, but also McKee Road, Maple Grove Road, and then Verona Road. So here you got a 3-bedroom, 2.5 bath, 1696 square feet, built in 2007, decent home. And another question sometimes people ask me, are homes selling for more than the asking price? Well, on this one in particular, yes, it did. In fact, May 10th, this one was listed at $429,900, sold for $450,000. So not always the case, but certainly in our low inventory market, sometimes it is the case. So here's an example. It did sell for $20,000 over the list price, but that's what you get for $450,000. Another area you can look is on the east side of Madison. So that's the west side, kind of southwest side of Madison. This one had sold over on High Cliff Trail. This is right off Cottage Grove Road, kind of by the east side of Madison, right before Cottage Grove. And here you get, well, a little bit more square footage. So this one had a finished basement along with it, but 3,000 square feet, 4-bedroom, 3.5 baths, built in 2001, so a little bit older. Also overlooks pond view and has a 3-car garage. So you get a little bit more home for your money over on the east side of Madison. Not always the case, but generally that's what I've found, is that you sometimes can get a little bit better value for the amount of square footage you get on some homes in some neighborhoods on the east side versus the west side. But again, there's exceptions all over the place to that rule. But this, I think, is one example. And this one, right, is kind of the opposite. They listed it originally at $500,000, and it didn't sell right away at that. In fact, they came down to $490,000, then down to $475,000, then down to $449,500 is what it eventually sold for. So, are homes always selling for more than the list price? No. Here's an example of it not. It really depends, and that pricing conversation is definitely a conversation that I'm willing to have with our clients, but it's usually kind of a secondary question of after we go see the home and see if it's possibly even a good fit for your needs and what you're looking for. Then we'll do some research on pricing and give you our opinion on what we think a good fair offer might be. Maybe it's above the list price, maybe it's below the list price. It really depends, but there's a number of factors that go into how I usually advise clients on pricing and that kind of thing. What else? So that's east side. Okay, what about maybe you want to buy something closer to downtown, more central? Can you get anything? Yes, you can. In fact, you could have got this house. It's over on Rodney Court. It was listed this was at $440,000. It's pretty close to that $450,000, but you're much older. This is the older part of Madison, early 1900s, built in 1917, 1,488 square feet, so even smaller than both the homes on the east side and the west side I shared before. 3-bedroom, 1.5 bath, but you're getting maybe that trade-off of being closer to a more walkable downtown area, more urban type of an environment. Maybe that's something you want to do. Live in the heart of the city, less than a half a block to Brittingham Bay, this Monona Bay right here. And you're close to the Kohl Center, you're close to campus. So I've had some clients in the past where maybe they've got even kids going to the UW for school and they want to buy something while their child is in school, or maybe they're going to grad school while they're in town. Absolutely a great idea. I've had many clients that have done that, and this is one example. But this one, again, going for more than the asking price. Listed at $389,000, sold for $440,000. So does it happen? Absolutely. It just kind of depends. But those are kind of 3 examples of kind of that median price and what you can get for your money in terms of our market. Let's see, the other things. Let's go back to I wanted to look at property taxes, because these are all different. So if we look at property taxes on the Mammoth Trail property, this one's at $66.54. The one on High Cliff, $76.78. And the one on Rodney Court was $46.25. So quite a range of almost a $3,000 difference between property taxes. And you might be wondering, why is it so different? I mean, they all sold for around $450,000. Why the big range in terms of property taxes? Well, their property taxes are based on the tax assessed value. So this one on Rodney Court only assessed at $269,300. The one on High Cliff assessed at $454,500, and it ended up selling for just less than that. The assessment, it adjusts every year. We usually get our tax assessment in the spring, sometime April or May, and it'll adjust usually up every year, but based on whatever you buy the home for today will eventually adjust up closer to that value at some point as well. Something to just keep in mind. We go back to our New York Times calculator. Property tax rate, this has 11%. I don't think that's right. Let's do maybe 1.3. Well, let's do even 1.2. What do we get? I just wanted to get closer to that 7,000 mark, which is closer to like the High Cliff value, right? 76, 78. I think a little bit better metric, at least based on this calculator. So property taxes, and then your marginal tax rate is going to be based on, if you're individual, based on your income, really. I mean, are you in that 20 to 24% tax bracket? What's the IRS tax bracket? And then also if you have other itemized deductions, again, this is probably a question for your CPA and that kind of thing, but there are tax advantages to buying a home. So that's definitely something to consider. And the more, well, at least as of now, what we've considered buying saves $38,000 over the next 9 years. So working further down, I don't want to know how much of this you want me to go into further, but there's some other things. If you go to, you have closing costs. So there's costs if you buy a home, there's some closing costs, and then also if you are selling a home, there's closing costs. Vary. They can be, I've seen on the low end, maybe $1,500 is closing costs. Plus, you'll typically have prepaid expenses. So prepaids meaning usually the lender is going to want 3 to 4 months of property taxes in a separate escrow account that they can set aside for property taxes, so that when the property tax bill comes in December, that there's money being set aside for that property tax bill. So I would err a little bit higher than that. Maybe it's $3,000 or $4,000. It could be even more if you're buying down the interest rate. So that's where sometimes if you see you're going to be in the home for a lot longer, maybe prepaying or buying down that interest rate, you pay a little bit more upfront, but over time that evens out because you prepay the interest basically to buy down the rate, and you get a lower fixed rate over time, and then you'll recoup that money after so much time in the home. So I think the default has it at like 1% for closing costs for buying, so you can leave it at that, but I would definitely encourage you to meet with your mortgage lender and talk with them about what their estimated costs are. They will give you what's called a good faith estimate of closing costs, which is a required document for all loan officers and all mortgage lenders and banks for them to provide. So if you even mention those words, can you send me the good faith estimate of closing costs? That'll give a more detailed breakdown of what all the costs are for buying the home. There's lending costs, there's also an appraisal cost, so you're gonna have to pay a few $100s, $500, $600, something like that for an appraisal to make sure that the value you're offering is there and that it's equal to or greater than your agreed upon purchase price. Let's see.
Hey, if you're watching this and you're thinking that buying a new home or condo might be the right decision for you, well then we'd be happy to chat. Give us a call, 608-440-9886. We'll set up a time. We can either meet in our office or we can set up a virtual meeting, whatever's best for you. But give us a call and we can talk about the options and what's gonna work best for you if buying is the right decision.
Selling a home, typically we've seen these prices for costs for selling can be anywhere from maybe 5 to 6% depending on the market and where the home is, and then also the value of the home. But I've also seen sometimes them higher. I mean, I just talked with somebody they sell a lot of land, vacant land, and their average price point is a little bit higher than our median home price, for example. And on those, the commission rates, costs for selling are usually a lot higher, closer to 10%. But maybe it's somewhere in that 5 to 6% range, call it 5.5 if you want, but you can kind of play around with that of what it might cost for selling the home. In most real estate deals, there's usually 2 agents involved. So usually going to be an agent that represents the seller called the listing agent, and then usually another agent representing the buyer called the buyer's agent. So those total costs for selling, it's usually going to be split between those 2 agents. And there's also costs for transfer tax in Wisconsin, title insurance, closing fees for the room fee and that kind of thing. There's some other costs, and we do have a breakdown that goes over all the itemized costs for selling a home if that's something you wanted to do. What else? Moving on, maintenance and fees. One of the benefits of being a renter is usually the landlord is going to pay for all that maintenance. If you own a home, there's maintenance, right? Every, 20 or 30 years, you're going to need to replace a roof. If the water heater breaks down, you got to fix it. There's maintenance. So highly recommend budgeting for some of those repairs, keeping money in a separate account or contributing to it on an annual or monthly basis to help maintain the property and maintain your values. If you calculate 1% per year, that'd be $6,500 for the first year. Maybe you use all that, maybe you use none of it, maybe you use some of it. But if you, for example, that's probably the cost of a new furnace right now, close to $6,000 for a typical median priced home in our area. It could definitely be more than that if you got to do the furnace and the air conditioner, right? It's not uncommon to see maybe $10,000 or $12,000 for both of those items. Or, a roof can easily be $10,000, $15,000, $20,000. Those, you don't want to be caught off surprise when they come, so it makes sense to budget for that. Let's see, homeowners insurance. What else? This has it at $35.75, which I think is a little high in our market, but I've usually seen that closer to maybe $2,000 or so on a more median priced home. So maybe closer to 0.31% for homeowners insurance. Extra utility costs. It is cold in the winter here. Maybe it could be $400 or $500 a month for a median priced home in the winter, and maybe it's only $200 a month in the spring or fall when it's, or even warmer months when it's not, you're not running the furnace as much. Although summer can also be high if you're running the air conditioning a lot and you like to keep it really cool inside. You know, those electricity costs can be pretty high as well. But maybe somewhere close to $350 a month on a median priced home, I think, is probably in line with the market. Other common fees. Most common fee I would say is like a neighborhood fee. Sometimes you'll see those that are maybe $150 a year, for example, and they cover usually not much, but it's going to cover, like, they've got some common area green space in a lot of neighborhoods, and those are going to be a common green space, so it'll cover like the maintenance or mowing and grass and stuff like that. If you calculate, what is that, $40 a month times 12, that's what, $480 a year. So it's not even that much. It's closer to like $20 a month, I would say. What, 20 a month times 12, you're at $240 a month, $240 a year. I mean, that's probably more common. Not every neighborhood does have an HOA, but sometimes some HOA, homeowners association, is somewhat common in a lot of neighborhoods. It's not always there, but usually it is. Especially on newer neighborhoods, I would say, and more planned unit developments. Those are the ones that typically will have some more common fees. Condominium, if you are buying a condominium, those definitely will have condo fees. You're probably talking $200-300 a month minimum, and they can be easily $400 or $500 a month depending on the price of the condo, and then also depending on what all is included. I mean, there's actually a condo over at the Cove on Lake Mendota Drive. I think their condo fees are like $700 or $800 a month, but they cover all of the heat and hot water and a lot of the utilities as part of the condo fee, and it's also right on Lake Mendota. So they have a lot of maintenance costs with the shoreline and just some of the stuff that goes along with lake living and that kind of thing. But what else? Common fees deduction, part of your common fees that might be tax deductible, so I don't usually see that as well. All right, additional renting costs. What else? You can plug these in. You'll usually have a security deposit of at least 1 month's rent. I think that's pretty typical. Broker fees, don't usually see that as much here. In the Madison area, most of the rentals are some either larger property management companies, and there's not a lot of sort of co-brokering that occurs between, like, if you were buying a home, like I mentioned before, in most deals there's usually 2 agents involved in buying and selling. On the renting, it's not as common to have 2 agents involved. Usually there's just kind of the rental company or owner or management company is really usually the only broker involved in that, and then they will usually assist with drafting the documents for the rentals and whatnot. Renter's insurance, definitely recommend that, at least for all of your interior contents. Default out to 1% there. Methodology, buying, this has some more definitions. At least based on that, median home price gives us our total. If you buy, $458,000 versus $494,000 if you were gonna rent, saving you a total of $35,000 over the next 9 years. Again, some of this influenced dramatically by recurring costs and opportunity costs, right? What's your opportunity for that money? And if you have a hot investment that you can get a 15% return on your money, maybe you want to put your cash into that and stay a renter. But if you can't find a 15% return on your money, maybe buying a home is going to be a better bet because it's a much safer investment that's going to appreciate over time and help build wealth over time as well. I think that's it on the New York Times article. The other thing I will just share is our mortgage calculator. This is on our website under the Buy tab, so you can go down to Mortgage Calculator and you can kind of play around and plug in some of these things here. It'll also break down monthly principal and interest payments. You can also calculate property taxes, insurance, private mortgage insurance, all these things that we talked about. There's also some qualifying information. So if you figure out you make $80,000 a year, plus maybe your spouse makes another $60,000 a year, maybe now you're up to $140,000 a year, how much is the maximum you could qualify for a loan, right? Based on this, max is usually around that 40 to 41% debt to income ratio. So they're going to look at all of your income on a monthly basis, but then also all of your minimum monthly obligations. Again, a lot of this, if you talk with a mortgage lender, mortgage person, they're going to help qualify you for sure and then issue you a pre-approval letter that'll make you ready to go buy a home. But if you wanted to play around with some of the mortgage calculator on your own, I highly recommend doing that either on our website or you can reach out to someone on our team and we'd be happy to set up a meeting with you and crunch some numbers for what might think might be the best option for you. Again, is it better to rent or to buy? Well, that's up to you, and it depends, and I hope you found this video helpful. I will include a link to all of these, the mortgage calculator, and then also the New York Times calculator that I went over in this video, and I hope you found this helpful, and if there's anything we can do to help in your home buying journey, feel free to reach out to myself or someone on our team. Hope you're having a great day. Thank you.